let's go ahead and get started. If it sounds like we are started, let's thank you for being here, committee members. Just a couple of or not reminders, but something that's new. You can see up here on this screen for voting. The USBE staff we're trying something new today. Our role in this is quite simple. When we discuss a motion or have a motion, Kelsey will put it up on the screen. You'll see it. It says no subject right now. It'll be in the top left corner. Maybe she'll type something for us to see. Tracy, can you hear us now?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Okay. Well, Tracy, I'm not going to go over the entire disclaimer, but keep it professional. How's that?
That sounds great.
So this is Tracy Watson. She's got public comment. Tracy, please.
Sure. I come to you today as the General Counsel and Legal Services Director for the Utah Education Association, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you briefly. My ask today is to just delay the substantive action proposed in R277-211. I think it's the last item on your agenda. And specifically, it's really related to the language in lines 296 to 306 in draft 1 dated August 16th, 2023. I really just need a little more time to study and hopefully to collaborate with Mr. Rasmussen, Ben, he usually lets me call him Ben, Carol Lear, and others. I currently represent many licensed educators whose consent decree includes the discretionary option to seek express authorization from the UPAC Executive Secretary to volunteer or work in a public school, and maybe during their suspension, and maybe not even related to a licensed position. It may be related to volunteering in their grandchild's classroom. It could possibly these days be related to serving as a para or, helping schools in other ways. It's not an automatic, it's discretionary. I think the statute allows it. I completely understand that Ben doesn't, and that's why I'm asking for just a little bit more time so we could collaborate. Ben invited me to collaborate with him on some of the changes before you today on R277, 210. And I think that was really productive. And I express my gratitude to Ben for that. And my problem is if we rush through this without some kind of exigent circumstances, then if it's a problem, I'm only left with the option of a public hearing. And, that's certainly a legitimate option. It's a legitimate process, but it costs a lot of time and energy on your part and on our part. So that's all my ask is just consider taking no action today on the substantive changes and allow me the opportunity to try to work with Ben over the next month and bring something collaborative to you next month. Thank you very much for this time.
Thank you, Tracy. We don't have any additional public comment. Is that correct? Okay, let's move then to agenda item 1.2, amendment to research data sharing agreement with Wasatch School District and Brigham Young University. And we're going to ask Katie Chalice if she's available to cue us up on this item. Any of those. And I think it's just push to talk.
Oh, I don't have to wait, huh? Okay, cool. So, Katie Chalice, Director of Privacy. Good morning, everyone. So the first data sharing agreement for your consideration today is an amendment. And I'll mention we have Kevin Rich and Todd Johnson, two of the researchers, are here in person today. So if you have any questions for them, they'd be happy to answer those. The primary change here is, well, and I'll say too that the committee might remember approving this earlier this year. I think it was in the spring. So the primary request here is a change in the scope, not the scope of the research itself, but in an expansion of the data set from, instead of students in grades K through 3, looking to have access to data for students K through 12. I think that's all I have to say on that, Chair.
Thank you. Do we have questions, Member Wood? And would you like to invite Todd and Richard, is that right? Kevin?
Steve?
Yeah. Whoever you want to, just the two of you. How about that?
Oh, I got it. Get over here.
Thank you. So if you'll, I'm not sure whether, I'm guessing that I have questions that are directed to these two gentlemen here. So that's why I'm inviting them up. Member Wood, I don't know where yours is too, but please go ahead.
Well, thank you. Possibly, and I apologize because I just realized that I had the question to Katie sitting in my draft. I was like, she always responds. Why didn't I get it? I'm like, well, because I didn't send it. So I apologize that this was not taken care of, in my pre-research for this meeting. I am interested in why we are increasing the agreement. This is a rather, not a lot of time has gone by. So have you completed your work with K through 3? Did you find those, successful teacher teams? Why now the extension? If you're still in the middle of the K through 3, why extend it now?
So I appreciate the question. So I'm Todd Johnson. I'm Director of Curriculum for Wasatch School District. And this is Kevin Rich, and he's Director of Literacy and Data and Research for our district. And we partner with Brigham Young University through a BYU public school partnership, if you're familiar with that. And so we're off the ground on this idea. And, if I might just take a minute and explain what our interest is, and thank you. And what we're trying to do. But in collaboration with the partnership, our motto is identify the best to learn from the best. And so through this partnership, Richard Sudwicks is also on this proposal. And he's a researcher, professor at Brigham Young University. And the idea is that if we can identify the top performing teams within our partnership and within the state of Utah, then we can study their practice and learn from them, and then try and also up our games so that we can improve the same way the best performing teams are improving in the state. And so with your last approval for K-3 literacy, we've been able to identify some of these collaborative teams within Utah and within the partnership, and we have them identified. And through the partnership, we are already making plans to study there. And so the purpose of this expansion request is so that we can simply study more teams at more grade levels in literacy, and then bring that knowledge to our district and even the 5 districts within the partnership.
Follow up, yes. Member Wood.
So is there some longitudinal data that you'll be requesting so that you can see, okay, we identified these things. Let's see where their students, will there be any ability to tie back to, oh, wait, you were in this. Where are you now? Is that kind of a long-term look that you're hoping to see, or will any of that be possible?
Yeah, we are in the data agreement. We're requesting a longitudinal data set so that we can see if it's been sustained, or if there's suddenly been an increase from over the previous year or two. That's another thing we want to see. Like, that means that they learned something in the last year or two that we really want to learn ourselves. And if they've been high the whole time, there's also something there that we want to learn. But yeah, those data sets and that longitudinal data set, like you're talking about, has a lot to teach us and a lot that we can go back and learn.
Thank you. Let me just ask, we've sat here with you before. We've talked a lot about student data. Now we're talking about teacher data, right? And is that true? We're following educators now. And one of the things that we're putting in here is teacher cactus ID. And
yeah, in my view, and I'll let the researchers disagree if they feel inclined, the Cactus ID was kind of like a technical update. It used to say teacher ID. I think Kevin was the one that said, oh, just to clarify, we're talking about their Cactus ID. So that's not an additional field. That's an area of clarification. And I think the focus still is primarily on student data, but using that data to identify educators that are especially affected. Is that an accurate representation?
Thank you. Any additional questions? Member Lear?
Do we need to talk into our mics?
Yes.
So I'm trying to figure out how de-identified these data are. First, you've got student identifiers, student SSID numbers. I get that. And they'll be connected to teacher cactus numbers, right? And so those will all be just numbers, right? But you'll track the students that the teacher has So if it's a very small class, possibly identifiable. Are there any exceptions for classes smaller than 10 or groups of students smaller than 10 or and then my sort of follow-up to that, or the next logical are there any consequences for the teachers? Say you get really bad information about teacher effectiveness, and even though this is, raw, but so can you just respond to that kind of train of thought? Is that a lot? Is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine. I'm going to try and respond to, those are great questions. I'm going to try and respond to each one. If I forget one,
No, and
feel free to remind me.
right.
But as far as consequences for the teachers, when we get this data back, for us, the way we look at it is this is celebratory data. We're getting the data back and we're trying to figure out and learn who's getting their students to learn the best so that we can go with them, go to them, celebrate them, and learn from them. That's the only purpose for this data set. There's really no other purpose. And then the numbers less than 10, I really like that question. In the data agreement as is, there's no disqualifying numbers less than 10. I don't recall seeing numbers any less than 10. But we filter those out. We filter those out anyway, because if they don't have a significant population size, if they don't have a size of significance, a sample of significance, then it doesn't. It's often less beneficial for us to go out and visit if they don't have a large enough student population, because one or two students can sway the results one way or the other, and we want one with a significant enough size that we know they have something to teach us about how to help more kids learn.
And then I'll just follow up by saying, just to emphasize, the purpose of this project was never meant to be evaluative. The purpose of the project is simply trying to study best practice.
And just one more question, then sort of that very much leads into that. So there won't be, oh shoot, now I lost my train of thought. It's early in the morning. That's all right. Thank you. I know that's not your purpose. That makes me a little concerned. I know what I was going to say. Who will have access to the data?
So the data is restricted to our research team.
Okay.
And
not district personnel, not.
No.
Okay. Just your research team
So the research team includes me, Kevin.
You are district personnel.
Dr.
Sedgwick's,
correct. And then also our director of academics at our district office, his name is Garrick Peterson, leads our team. Okay. And we do discuss results with him. But outside of that circle, all we would do is identify the schools. But then what we're most interested in is how are they getting their results?
Okay.
And so it would never come back to by the student, by the teacher. It would simply be once the collaborative team within the school, within the district is identified, we would like to go out and visit that team and study their practice.
Okay, that helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. Member Wood?
Just a question on that. So once you've identified that, are these teachers really, they're not giving us the right to give you their information? So how does that play between getting into a school? Like, what are the protections for teachers that are saying, well, wait a minute, I didn't ask for my data or my class to be followed, tracked?
So we actually have two previous approvals, and one is for Math 6. And then obviously the one here this morning is K3 asking to be expanded. But I will tell you that as we have gone out and visited on the previous approvals, that has really never come into question. In fact, the collaborative teams have been nothing more than flattered that we've identified their good work. And in fact, they've said things like, wow, nobody has really reported back to us how well we did on state end of level tests. And we'd be pleased to share with you what we think led to our results. So that's really never even been questioned. Teachers have actually been really excited that they've been identified as the best.
Thank you. No, with no other questions, I entertain a motion.
Make that motion.
Please, Member Carey, Vice Chair Carey, will you turn your mic on?
I'd like to move that the committee approve the amendment to the research data sharing agreement with Wasatch School District and Brigham Young University and forward to the board for approval.
Thank you, Vice Chair Carey. The motion before the board or before the committee is that the committee approve the amendment to the research data sharing agreement with Wasatch School District and Brigham Young University and forward to the board for approval. Board Member Hart, you have a question? We're just waiting for the screen. We are ready to vote. Yes. Okay, committee members, you see it on your screen. It is unanimous with 5 votes in favor. Thank you. Close that voting before it changes. Good. Okay. Thank you. Okay, let's move to agenda item 1.3, amendment to data sharing agreement with DCFS. And again, we have Katie Chalice.
Thanks. This agreement was also passed recently, but not by, some of the members on this committee have not seen it because I believe it was in October of last year. So the only request here is an extension of this agreement. We have a couple people on deck. Is Tanya here?
I'm here online, Katie.
Okay, great. Thank you. So Tanya Albornoz is here, if the committee has questions, and also Jeff, I apologize, I'm not sure how to pronounce your last name. Harrop, I think it is. He's with DCFS, and he's also online if the committee has questions.
Thank you. And this sounds like exactly what you said, just a time extension. Is that right? So nothing has changed. The questions that we've asked about privacy and things like that has not changed, just simply a time extension. So with that understanding, committee members, do we have questions or a motion that we can put forward? Member Hart?
I can make a motion unless there's questions. Sure.
Member Lear?
Just remind me that the previous termination date and then I see a termination date of 31 December 2023. Is that is that how long? What's the far out extension date of this?
Oh, I'm looking at the document for the first. Okay, yes. So the original agreement was planned to terminate on December 31st. Now we're asking to expand it. It looks like 3 years, but it's actually 2 year.
I thank you. I'm sorry, I was looking at my document and that's clear. Thank you. That's all I needed.
Yeah, and Katie, can you help us understand why the original was for 1+ years and now we're jumping all the way to 26?
Yeah, I think I have to say, I think it was probably an ambitious deadline. There was some interest in kind of testing it out. This is all from my memory because I was not earnestly involved originally, but there was some kind of interest in testing it out for a year to see if it would work. The ambitious part comes that we didn't really build in time to train people and get the system like we're going to have to do some work on our end as an agency to get these folks access to Data Gateway and other information like that. So it's more of a practical timeline, I believe.
Okay. So this timeline to January 26 will offer time enough to take care of all those logistical issues. Okay. Thank you.
Chair.
Okay. Member Hart?
It also, just for the record, it says that there were delays in obtaining approval from DHHS. And so none of the data has been shared yet. So they kind of no. And then they also mentioned that they needed to train staff. So it sounds like there was an ambitious plan. Yeah. I'm ready to make a motion if you're comfortable, committee. Okay. I move that the committee approve the amendment to the data sharing agreement with the Division of Child and Family Services and forward to the board for approval.
Thank you, Member Hart. The motion before the committee is that the committee approve the amendment to the data sharing agreement with the Division of Child and Family Services and forward to the board for approval. Committee members, please vote. And that looks to be unanimous. Thank you. We will move to agenda item 1.4, amendment to research data sharing agreement with Palacios et al. Katie is going to cue us up again. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. This is also an extension only of duration. So this is a project with 3 researchers. They were exploring 3 research questions. They've completed their research on 2 of those research questions and have asked for an additional year to have access to the data for to complete their study of the 3rd research question. And Dr. Natalie Bowman is online, I believe, in case the committee has any questions about the research.
Thank you. Committee members, any questions? Again, I just a time shift. Is that right? Member Lear, please.
I move that the committee approve the amendment to the research data sharing agreement with Palacios et al. And forward to the board for approval.
Thank you, Member Lear. The motion before the committee is that the committee approve the amendment to the research data sharing agreement with Palacios et al. And forward to the board for approval. Please vote. It looks to be unanimous. Thank you. Thank you for being here, Natalie. Sorry we didn't have questions for you.
Thank you for the approval. Appreciate it.
Yep.
Have a great day.
Did you get your question answered? What were you asking, Member Lear? I'm just curious.
Where the vote showed up on the screen.
Yes. Oh, for the individual votes? Yeah, and you're going to have to see the eye doctor to see who's.
We might have to adjust our seating.
There's no hope right now.
We do this in the classroom.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. It happens. It happens.
It's all right. Yeah.
Okay. Let's move on to agenda item 1.5. This is the SESB Charter School, New Satellite School, and Large Expansion Request Process. And do we have? Okay, so Angie's gonna cue us up here.
Just going to give a brief reminder that R277552 was significantly or substantially amended in the spring with a new effective date of May, sometime in May, when the new provisions took effect. And with those changes, the board rule provided new procedures or requirements related to new satellite or large expansion requests. So the State Charter School Board has updated their processes and have submitted them to the board for approval. And you can see Marie Stevenson, it looks like, has joined us and is available.
Yeah, so a question as you're looking over this, a question that I had is that we recently discussed some changes, as Deputy Stallings mentioned, to the number of students, what makes a large expansion, what makes a small expansion. We settled on 100 or fewer would be a small expansion. We're pushing this through today. Are we expecting to see this again in the near future? And I direct that question to Ms. Stephenson, representing the State Charter School Board, as we're pushing through these charter expansion applications and policies. yet the rule has changed recently. Can you help us understand the process on the SCSB side?
Yes, thank you, Chair Hymas. With that, we are aware that the change has occurred and that it's currently posted for public comment. And our understanding was that the rule would actually become effective in October after that public comment period. And so at that point, any adjustments that are needed either to this policy and procedure or to the small expansion policy and procedure, we would bring back after that effective date in October.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Any other questions on this from committee members? Member Hart?
Yeah, I have a question on 6B, I think it is. I
Yeah,
am
which
looking,
doc-
I'm sorry, I'm looking at the
So we have
application.
The
It's the,
expansion application, okay.
yeah, new satellite and large expansion application.
And these are the required attachments. Is that what you're looking at?
I am looking at number 6. You have to provide a 2 to 4 page response addressing a number of items. Okay, and I apologize, I should have done this myself. Are the items like number 6, A, B, and C, is that part of the rule?
Yes, all of the required elements here are part of the board rule.
We passed that out already?
Correct. That took effect in May.
Oh, thank you. I missed that. Well, there's just an item there I'm concerned about.
Okay,
Thank you. It was just a question.
Yeah.
It wasn't a.
okay. Member Lear?
You anticipated me. Marie, maybe you can tell us, and this was sort of, I was talking to the superintendent for a minute. Sorry if you said this. Are there immediate expansions in the wings that you're addressing?
For this large expansion and satellite? project?
Yes.
We are anticipating to have a few schools apply for that. We would anticipate that we could push this out to the schools in November or December, pending where things are with the State Board of Education, and that we would then hear those in January or February from our office.
So are you speculating, or do you know from like 2, 3, 5 schools who will be applying for this?
I believe I've heard a definite from 3 schools.
Okay. I've expressed this so many times. I sound like a broken record. I'm concerned about the quality of the schools who expand. And that's the quality control has been a concern for me for years. And because charters have a different governance structure and a different board structure, it makes me nervous when they expand. If they're good schools and they have really good, the metrics to the best we can understand them are good, then I am great. I think but when they're just barely marginal, or it's not easy to find the information on their website, or their board's turning over frequently, I just really nervous about that. So I'm just expressing that concern. I understand that. And I guess I don't see the exact equivalent between a charter school and a traditional school. So I'm just concerned. We'll just watch for who comes forward. Thanks.
I don't know if you'll ever see the exact equivalent between a charter and I don't know if there is one exact, but Member Hart?
I don't know a public school that has to have a waiting list of 40% for 3 consecutive years before they are allowed to expand. And so
Let's hold on a second.
Yeah.
Hey.
I just
Okay.
want to make a motion.
let's, member Hart's got a comment and then member
Well,
Carrie, Vice Chair Carrie,
I-
please will make a motion.
I wanted to, what I was going to say, regardless of, and Carol and I have had this discussion, it's no secret, but this is this is rigorous. I mean, looking at it, I mean, right down to, and I'm appreciative of the controls, but there is a number of redundancies and assurances here that I'm interested. I too am interested to see what comes forward as interested parties taking advantage of this opportunity, because it's a high bar. So I was also ready to make a motion, but no, please.
Vice Chair, oh, member Wood.
Just a quick question. Are we setting up a domino effect of, she said there might be 3 schools in the wings, but if we're going to have to bring it back for changes, will they be in the middle of something as we have to amend something else because this passed? Is it the right time? You know, like the policy, we know the policy is probably going to be incorrect the minute we pass it because we already have the 100 schools sitting in the wings waiting for the time to go through. So why are we doing this now if we're just going to be bringing it back? Or can we amend it now, or we can't because the other rule has not become in effect yet? How do we prevent duplicative efforts in our committee, in our board?
Oh, thank you. So I believe we asked this question similar with the small expansion. Why do this now? There's people waiting. Is there a domino effect? We were told that no, there wouldn't be. We don't have to go back. Once they've been approved and started on that process, we wouldn't have to go back. Member or Deputy Stallings.
One idea is that the committee could make a motion today stating that the next round of changes, because likely it's going to be moving the small expansion request from 50 to 100 and then updating this process from 50 to 100, or to update the definition to meet what's now in 552. You could just make a motion that any subsequent submissions over the next 6 months go directly to consent calendar, so that and then it could just be approved as part of the consent calendar, you know, in 2 months, whenever it comes back. I don't know if that's
The consent calendar takes longer than an agenda item. So I'm hesitant there, but I don't know. And you could help me understand, and Member Wood asked the question as well. Do we have to go back? I believe that is part of the question. Do we have to go back if this passes today and make changes to these schools, or once they're approved, they're already moving?
Well, it shouldn't change the schools that are in the process, because remember, this is just about what is the threshold that you use one process versus the other. So everybody who starts down the road with this new satellite or large expansion process, they're not going to be impacted because they'll have already started the process, and it's not going to say, oh, you went from, 150 to these won't change anybody in the process. And even if the conditions change enough, the State Charter School Board could still use the process that was in place at the time. The other thing, arguably, you could do is maybe make 2 motions, one that approves these, and then a second one that provides the State Charter School Board essentially an approval of their updates in the next 3 to 4 months, if those updates are only or limited to any rule changes, something like that. That is another idea.
Right.
Sorry, let's, I know Member Wood had a follow-up, and then Member Carey has a motion, and I'd love to get a motion on the floor that we can discuss. So Member Wood.
Right, we did talk about that, didn't we? Putting motions in first. But what about these two? So right now, as I'm looking at this, if you had a school with 75 students, they would have to go through this very involved process as it stands, where in a few months, they will not have to go through this involved process. They can go through the small school expansion process.
And I don't know if we can direct this to Marie. I don't know if schools are seeing the writing on the wall and are making a decision saying, you know what, I'm going to hold off for a couple months, or if they're saying, I need to do this now. So ultimately, if the school is aware, they can make that decision for themselves. Is that accurate, Marie?
Yeah, I would agree with that. And looking at the small expansion applications that we have received, and we'll be reviewing those at our board meeting next week. Really, we saw that one, the only schools that ended up applying, are at capacity, or else it's just adding that one additional grade. And so I don't see a lot that are feeling like, oh, I wish we'd had 75. I think they feel like 50 at this point is a reasonable number. And they are aware, we've tried to keep our stakeholders informed as to where we are in this process. And so they are aware that it'll look a little different for next year's cycle, coming into August and September of next year. We have
Marie,
kept sorry.
Do we have any schools that are in that 50 to 100 range right now that would benefit from waiting?
Not that I'm aware of.
Thank you.
I don't.
Hold on one second. We kind of, this is a little bit different here. We do have maybe a different answer to the question from one of.
We've not let other people come sit at the table who've been.
Well,
we're not members of staff usually.
That's semi-true. I don't know if you want me to give examples, but if there's a concern with it, we won't do it. How's that? We'll get the answer offline here. So Member Carey, you had a motion. Let's do it. Let's put a motion on the floor.
I'd like to move that the committee approve the State Charter School Board's new satellite school and large expansion processes.
Thank you, Vice Chair Carey. The motion before the committee is that the committee approve the State Charter School Board's new satellite school and large expansion processes. Is there discussion to this motion? I don't see any discussion. I guess I'm last at the table here. It's unanimous. Thank you.
Thank you.
I do have a point of
Thank you,
order.
Member Wood.
I would hope that we could get our committees back to where they were prior to COVID, where we kind of had that interaction with the public and the ability to speak. And that was something that I appreciated as a bystander for many, many years, that I knew I could come to a committee and interact and have a voice heard.
Let's, if we can, after this meeting, maybe the five of us can just talk about processes there. And leadership.
Could have had comments, at the beginning of the meeting like we did in one.
Right. Yeah, we'll discuss it. Thank you. Okay, let's move on to agenda item 1.6. Thank you, SCSB staff and USBE staff and committee members for that discussion. And we're happy to see things moving forward there. Agenda item 1.6, R277-925, Effective Teachers in High Poverty Schools Incentive Program. We have Deputy Stallings here to cue us up.
Thank you, Chair. This rule is being amended due to the passage of SB 222 during the 2023 session. And then a definition was added to the rule. This 53F2513 is the rule, the bill, the code, the statutory provision that governs this program. So that is one change. And then the other change was this clarification to add that eligible teachers who are seeking this stipend, their MGP or their growth, the growth of their students will be measured based on student performance on standard assessment for students who've been with them for a full academic year. So the student performance of, say, a student that came halfway through the year would not count towards their MGP. Remember that for this stipend, you have to have a certain growth percentage. MGP just demonstrates whether your students, how much growth they're making in a school year. And that's it. Those are the two changes. Oh, yes.
Thank you. Member Hart has a question.
Deputy Stallings, trying to figure out how to. So how transparent would the data collection be to teachers on this? Oh, the reason I ask is because when you have your when you go out to Data Gateway and you look at a roster of students in any particular class, there's a variety of reasons. And I realize there's probably not the person we need to answer this, but maybe we can take it back and get the answer. Is there an appeal process? Is there a way for a teacher, if they asked, could see who made that calculation or how that calculation was made? Students show up on people's rosters for very interesting reasons. And I would hate to think that a teacher's qualification for this program, I'm trying to be careful because I'm not slamming data collection or accuracy here. It could be you're an 8th grade teacher and there's a student from youth in custody that is rostered to you and you don't have that student really, but you have that student. Like there's just situations that come up and I'm just worried that teachers would be found not eligible and there'd be no way to figure out why or how. There. Did you?
Darren, please.
Oh, I was hoping that it was some magical.
It was magical.
Okay. Can you, do you want to try to do better with asking that question or do you want me to try?
Okay to try to summarize. The question was, what is there an opportunity for teachers to verify or check who has been assigned to their roster for purposes of calculating the MGP score? Because Board Member Hart was stating there are times when a student might be attached to them or assigned to them that maybe they don't agree should be assigned to them.
Button. Okay. All right. Darren Nielsen, Assistant Superintendent of Student Learning. So in the Data Gateway, when we get the return files at the end of each year, in the Data Gateway, teachers there's functionality, at least with UTUS or with RISE, for a teacher to go in and look at the values that the students they currently have enrolled in their class had received from their previous year's assessment. And then you can also filter on and see the students that were assigned to you in the previous year. There are rules that are contained in the accountability manual that determine how students are attributed to a school. Not necessarily, those rules aren't articulated to a teacher, but full academic year is one of those. So a student has to be enrolled for a full academic year, which is, I believe, 160 days or more for that student's outcomes to be attributed to the school with which they are administered the assessment in. I don't know if that answers the question or not.
Well, it's more, and it's like I said, it's not because anybody made any errors or whatever, but sometimes you'll have a student that is in, I gave the example of a youth in custody or that they actually receive the instruction somewhere but else, but they're attached sometimes. And that might not be a good example, but I just, right. But I'm just wondering if, what my question really is there a process if a teacher had thought they were eligible and found not to be eligible, can they find out, not an appeal, but can they is there a way or a mechanism for them to ask what data was included?
Yeah, so discovery and
Yeah, just-
transparency around that.
Yeah.
I can tell you the answer to that is true in large districts because we have periodically in my time here had questions come through the LEA. Granite District is primarily where I've received these questions about teachers that were either they believe should be eligible or qualified for the benefit or not. Because the SURF file that we provide, it's a master file of all the student assessment records and student SSIDs. So in larger LEAs, they have the capacity, they can go through and they oftentimes will already know which teachers are eligible before our staff goes through the timing of determining that. So there have been times in the past where LEAs, and in the rule itself, there's a place for a petition.
Is that, because I didn't see it.
Because I think there's in size of 10 is one of the thresholds, and there's a place in there for an appeal or petition. I'm not sure which word it would be for educators or the LEA on behalf of the educator to seek relief if they believe there was a teacher that had a qualifying conditions but didn't meet one of the criteria.
That's line 83.
Did you find it?
I did, yeah.
Oh,
I think more
that answers my question right there.
Okay.
What I would personally, what I do is I'd pull up Data Gateway and pull the roster and say, do you have any issues with that? My question was simply, did we have line 83 in there, which I now know we do. Did we have that mechanism? And we do. So, thank you.
Thank you, Member Hart. Vice Chair Carey, we hit your microphone.
Just a quick question for Deputy Stallings. My concern is on the, and I don't know the answer. What is the reporting burden? Like I look at this and say, okay, now we need to know that a teacher is there the full academic year. That seems pretty easy. But when you have teachers going in and out of all these classes, what's the burden on the LEA to keep track of the time?
Yes, thank you. And Erica Horsley is also virtually, you can see her on the screen right there. And she could probably give us some details, but my understanding is most of this is automatic, that as teachers would move from school to school, they update their Cactus ID or that information automatically. But I would defer to Erica to confirm.
Sorry about that. Erica Horsley, Program Specialist for Effective Teachers in High Poverty Schools. The data that is supplied to us is from the LEA, and so we look to them to give us correct data for the information that we use for eligible teachers in this program. We gather that around October 1st, December 1st each year, and then look through that. We do give it to the districts, to the LEAs, to make sure that what we have is consistent with what they have. And so we do have that review from the districts as well. Did that answer the question?
Member or Chair Highness.
The mics are overrun here. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does.
And then I think we have Member Lear had a question next, and then Member Hart.
I don't have a question. I was just going to clarify. Well, from a practitioner standpoint, it sounds even more difficult than it actually is. It just goes up as part of the Utrex upload, and quite frankly, it's magical, and it then shows up on Data Gateway, and it's just there. So, I mean, there's always the ability to correct errors, but it's just there. I think.
Thank you, Member Lear.
I had a brief comment and I was ready to make a motion. My comment was just, it seems like the students moving in and out of the class is more of a concern for tracking than I would think than the teachers turning over, although I can see that happening too. But if Darren were still here, I was curious how many teachers percentage-wise actually get this versus don't, but that's okay. I'm ready to make a motion.
That is a good question, and maybe we could get that sent in an email.
That's great.
Oh, Erica, can you answer that question
many-
if you heard that?
The percentage of teachers who receive.
Just right, rough. I mean, how many teachers are included versus excluded from this bonus? And I won't hold you to the estimate if you have that. Or if you don't, I don't want to stress you.
I don't have that off the top of my head right now.
Okay.
I could maybe look it up and email that information to you.
Not to worry.
Okay.
That's okay.
Can I ask Erica, just has the percentage been increasing? Are we rewarding these teachers? Is the program working?
From the report that Jonathan Collins and I do, it seems to keep at a steady rate. But I had a few more eligible teachers this year than I did last year, so.
Okay, thank you. I apologize. It's hard enough to be put on the spot for a question. It's even harder when it's percentages and numbers, right? So our apologies as committee members, but Deputy Stallings.
I would like to just provide 2 points of background that might be helpful for you all. Number one, this program is not automatic in the sense that it requires a district or charter school to choose to participate because they provide half of the matching funds. So if the teacher gets, and I can't remember the bonus amount, Erica, and I apologize. I'm just going to use an easy 5,000. The state. It's 7,000. So the state would contribute 3,500 and the district or charters would contribute 3,500. So there are teachers in the state who qualify for the stipend who are not receiving it because their district or charter school has chosen not to participate. So I wanted to make that clarification. It's because of the matching funds that they wouldn't, because they may not have the matching funds to contribute. The second thing is, Erica, correct my recollection, but there was a little report or study done on this program, and the retention rate was, remember that the teachers who participate or are eligible for this program come from quote unquote high poverty schools. And there was a little study done that showed that retention of teachers in high poverty schools who received this stipend actually were retained and stayed longer than some other teachers in high poverty schools. And is that my recollection correct, Erica?
It is. A lot of the teachers said that it helped them to decide to stay, but it wasn't the main reason they decided to stay in the high poverty schools. It was the students, but it helped them decide to stay. Does that make sense?
We can take second place to the students. We're okay with that. Remember, Lear, you had a comment and a motion?
I did, and I missed, I had one little technical question that's maybe an Angie question that is maybe a little tedious, but.
She's getting more information right now.
I know.
Can we just ask, and maybe this is something Vanessa could, or Elise, could you just forward that? I remember reading a really good, informative but short report. Can we just forward the report to the?
Dr. Thompson, can you forward that?
I recall it being very informative, very short, but to the point. I think it would just be helpful because I would anticipate the full board to have those questions.
Perfect. Member Lear?
And Angie, I just had a question on line 56. On a standards assessment, do we really mean that? Do we mean standardized? We had this discussion yesterday. This issue came up yesterday where it'd be nice if we had some standard assessment language.
It is a defined term. It says standards assessment and it points to 53E 4303. And in there, it's also encoded. It's called a standards assessment.
And what it means is a standardized.
It's this. It's what's described in here. So it's mathematics for students in grades 3 through 8. It's what's here.
All right. So they're essentially standardized assessments.
Mm-hmm. But they call them standards assessments in code. And so that's what we call it in this rule.
Perfect. Thank you. Now I'll make the motion. That's okay. And I move that the committee approves R277-925 draft 1 on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading.
Thank you, Member Lear. The motion before the committee is that the committee approves R277-925 Draft 1 on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading. Okay, please vote. Looks like we have that 5 in the affirmative. It passes unanimously. Kelsey, does this show up on the screens at home? I'm sure the many viewers, they get to see this.
That is the part of the beauty with this system so that the public can see in real time how the votes shake out and who is voting what. So they can see everything that's on both these screens. They can
Perfect.
see on the YouTube.
Thank you. Perfect.
Interested.
Will you hit your mic and ask that question?
I'm also hoping that someone that's watching online can let us know about the sizing of it. I know we might not be able to change that, but I'm wondering if, since they have to look at both screens, how.
Yeah, Kelsey adjusted it. It's much larger now. Yeah, off to the right, the
To see the
individual cast,
individual
yeah.
votes. I just, I'm looking forward to watching it when I get home so I can do version 2.
Double meeting. Sounds good. Tell us how it goes. Okay. Let's move to agenda item 1.7, R277-495, electronic devices in public schools. And we have Elise Newey who's going to cue us up.
Thank you. Good morning. Elise Newey, Policy Advisor. This rule is just up for its 5-year continuation, and in consultation with staff, there were no changes that needed to be made at this time. If you do scroll through it and see there is a slight change on line 36 where we were just fixing a typo, there was a reversed number, but there's no substantive changes whatsoever.
Vice Chair Carey.
I'd like to propose a motion on this. And that would go to line 85.
Okay, let staff get ready. They'll pull up line 85 for us.
I have a question and just a point of information.
Okay.
While you're processing, this is only noticed as a continuation. So are we still able to go into it? Okay, thank you.
Thank you for that clarification. Perfect. Okay. So I think we're ready for a motion.
So my motion would be that before the word bully, we add the language significantly impair academic excellence. And then I would like to speak to the motion.
Please, there's no second required. So yes.
May I ask, do you want it to be after? Oh, sorry.
Here.
My question is whether we want to put prohibitions on the use of electronic devices in ways that, are you saying a standalone new one significantly impair, not just right, it's not meant to be a qualifier before bully?
Correct. So if
Okay.
it would make
It's a
more
new
sense. Yeah. Mhm.
Okay.
And then semicolon, and I guess go into the next
Yeah.
line.
Perfect.
And as I read this policy, I think it's important that, our LEAs have these policies, and they all do. And I think it's essential that they address the items that we have here. But as we worked with Kathy Davis and others on the suicide prevention, electronic devices play a substantial role in that. And not only in that particular regard, but just in overall the academic setting. And I have been in schools that prohibit them. I've been in schools that have very lax policies. And what I would like about this is it gives each LEA that flexibility, right? You design the policy that works best for your particular environment. But I do think that they should have one that parents can look at, and then that LEA can work with the stakeholders in their particular area to develop that policy in a way that works best for that cohort.
Vice Chair Carey, just a question on this. I'm trying to process this in, quite frankly, my own discipline policy or electronic device policy, excuse me. what would this look like? An example of this that would significantly impair academic excellence. It just feels to me that it's very open to interpretation of what that would look like. Any thoughts on that? Or I like where the intent is. I'm looking at now the application once it's in the rule.
May I, Chair?
Please.
And so I had the same concern and I tried to use specific words, but then I thought when we look at the words like bully, humiliate, intimidate school-related individuals, those are also open to interpretation. And each LEA is able to look at those and define it. And so I'm happy to consider substituting those words if there's particular statutory language that's typically used. But I do think that it's important that as a board, we send the message that, look, we want more accountability is not the right word, but we'd want to send the message that it's important that these electronic devices be regulated through board rule.
Thank you. Member Hart?
Yeah, I understand where you're going, because that's obviously where my mind would go too, is okay. But I do think that it offers a space that we don't really have right now, in that students can just be, they don't have to be bullying or humiliating or harassing or intimidating. They could just be plain annoying and disruptive to the academic environment. I don't need to elevate it to these, which are very loaded words. Like, we all have the problem of defining what is bullying. I mean, rude people are not necessarily bullying. And so because of students being rude and distracting from the academic environment doesn't mean that it goes to it elevates to a bullying or a safe schools there is that category where even, the smartwatches, they're just distracting and inappropriate. And I don't necessarily think that is covered. And when you bring in a parent and say, your child's not using this properly, they're not focused on what they need to be focused on. And really they look at these kinds of policies and they're like, are you calling my child? It just elevates it when we need to be able to say, you know what, that cell phone, that watch, it's not appropriate in this class. And I do think this puts a space for that. Now, is it easily defined? Is it, that's on us, but I do see where it adds a reality that needs to be, teachers and schools need to be backed up in saying that even pulling out your phone and fiddling with it while you're supposed to be engaged in a group process in a classroom is wrong and is appropriate to be disciplined for. And I think this supports teachers.
Can I just ask, I know there's other questions. Elise, go ahead, and then I'll ask my question.
I just wanted to make a note that Rick is here with us with questions. He is the staff that consulted on this, and so he would have any questions or answers for you.
Thank you. Let me ask my question, Member Lear, then I'll jump to you. Member Carey, Vice Chair Carey. The word significantly, is there in this conversation that we're having, right? Is that needed there? Impair academic excellence? Is that enough? Significantly, what does that look like? Right? Again, is that left to interpretation? Which is fine. Like I agree with all these things. I think this could be good. I agree with what Member Hart has put before us as well. And I think that this would update in a generation or a current classroom that it's very much needed. So, but tell me about this significantly. Is that just to push emphasis? Where are you going with that one?
When I woke up this morning, I did not think I would have to define the word significantly, but thank you for that challenge. My, yeah. my thinking, and let me start there. My thinking was I didn't want to send the message that every time a student brings out their electronic device, that the school had to address that. And I didn't want to force the LEAs to think, how do we address all these devices all the time? And so my use of the word significantly was actually to provide a buffer to the LEA so they did not have to do that. It's when it reaches that threshold of significance, then you would need to develop the policy. But again, the word would still have to be defined, but I think it sends them, my intent is to send the message that you don't need a policy every time someone breaks out a phone at their locker while classes are changing. That was my reason for that, as well as tying it into academic excellence. If you're at a football game and everybody's on their device, you don't need a policy because that's not impacting academic excellence. That was the theory, the thinking.
So we have a couple of comments. We're going to go Member Lear first and then Member Wood.
And the significantly I liked. My sort of discomfort with the phrase was more academic excellence is sort of not what I would think of in terms of addressing and let me just say it this way. I think environment is a better word. I know academic excellence is
academic environment is
the academic excellence is more the phrase of the hour, but significantly impair the academic environment is really what I think that, because keeping in mind I think as I look back, we're setting prohibitions. This is what we're telling LEAs, that your policy has to include at least definitions of covered by policy, prohibitions on the use of electronic devices in ways that significantly impair the academic environment.
Do we have a motion?
Yes.
We like.
Sorry.
I think we all like where you're going.
Sorry.
Let's
Yes,
and Member
that's
Carey.
a little backwards there. Significantly
I
impair.
actually would vote against that. So
Oh,
it's not very friendly.
then it's not friendly. Then help me. Yeah, then maybe that's not what you were thinking. I'm just thinking of the environment as opposed to a standard is what we would be concerned about in a policy. But
Do you want to put forth a motion, Member Lear, or do you want to see how this plays out? What would you like to do?
oh shoot, why does this thing shut down so quickly?
I don't want to play
You know what,
politics here, but I
I'd like
think
to
you
hear
have.
what
Okay.
Leanne has to say, and then maybe
Okay.
after I spoke to my pretend motion. Thanks.
Thank you. Member Wood, go ahead.
No, I wanted to speak, sorry, for this motion, just because, and I know we avoid personal, but I have a senior in high school who was not doing well. And when I contacted the teacher to find out what was wrong, he was watching the World Cup during class. So he was not impacting anyone else's environment. He was simply, and she had no real way to say he wasn't doing anything wrong. He was not avoiding, he was watching the World Cup. And so had this been there, she could say, you know what, this is impacting your academic excellence, and come to me, and we resolved it and had a discussion. But I like this. It just would have given her some freedom to say, you know what, this isn't helping you.
I appreciate that thought. I would, I guess, argue that the environment includes an individual environment. If that mindset is taken away, right, then that impacts that environment. I think we can go back and forth. I actually, think it's important that we do, so that when we take it to the board, we can stand as 5 strong committee members saying, no, this is what we meant and this is what we want. So I do think it's worth the argument here. Member Hart.
I might have a motion. What I noticed, I was concerned about significantly because like that isn't significant to the people around, it's significant to the individual student. But then I realized that on line 82, this is a shall, not a may. So I think it's more appropriate to include the significantly, because that is required. And then an LEA can go beyond that and say, not include significant. Do you see what I'm saying? I'm saying that significantly actually is the baseline. And if they want to make their policy more restrictive, they can. If it said may, I wouldn't want a significantly there. But I'm wondering if significantly impair academic, now I lost it, focus. Would focus be a word? Because you're right, we're striving for excellence, but what we're dealing with is an academic environment in the classroom.
So we've
A
got
focus.
we've got two potential motion amendments to Member Carey's motion. Can we talk about focus for a second? Is there any thoughts on that term being used, Member or Vice Chair Carey?
Again, I understand the direction. My concern would just be, I think that brings in more ambiguity than the use of the term excellence, especially as a board. Is I believe we discussed this a few board meetings back about highlighting academic performance and the standard of academic excellence. So I thought by tying that into this standard, that would provide clarity. But I do appreciate what Board Member Hart said, which is, well, this is the floor. And if someone wants to enhance it, they can. But again, I think it just brings ambiguity in. As a board, I think we voted on the academic excellence emphasis, or at least we discussed it. And I think having that reflected here demonstrates that as a board, we recognize that use of these electronic devices, it has a diminishing effect on that standard.
I know Member Lear has a comment as well. Before we get there, there's just another word that was thrown out, perhaps academic achievement, if that fits in there as well. Just something to consider. But Member Lear, please.
And my point was going to be, I like the idea. I think adding that element is important as a base for LEA policies. And I don't know if the word matters that much. I think environment is maybe suits me a little better in terms of just the phrasing in the statement. They all have the same intent. So
They do. I'm worried about the grammar of it. Can you impair academic excellence, or do you impair the environment which then creates
better said? That's my point.
academic?
The word choice I like better.
Limits academic excellence.
But Member Carey makes a good point in that it taps into our academic excellence mindset. So
it's just, I can see a high school senior saying, well, me watching the World Cup is not changing.
There's more excellence there.
Anybody yeah. It just grammatically, can you impair excellence? You can impede excellence, but you're impeding the environment which creates.
So let me make a motion. We could, I don't want to belabor this forever, but I would make a motion that we amend the phrase to significantly impair the academic environment. And if Member Carey accepts that, then it's his motion and we can go forward. If not, I'll make it as a motion.
Can I just make one more?
Okay, let me just ask. I know.
I think we can do both by adding significantly impair the academic environment. I had it in my head. Limiting Don't make it that, okay.
You're adding. Well, if we talk about achievement, I want to go back to this word achievement. Just for a second, does achievement, when I think of that, it's anything that halts the ability to. I'm sorry. So, in full disclosure, Deputy Stalling said, or you could consider the word achievement. And I've been thinking about it and thinking, what does achievement do? And well, we are nitpicking, but like I said, I wonder if it's worth it before we get to the board and say, no, this is why we chose this word, so that we don't have to go through and define.
From Molly's concern, is it the same? Because if the answer is yes, I think we should leave it as excellence. If the answer is no.
I don't really know where achievement. Like where.
So instead of excellence, it would say academic.
Oh, that works. That's great.
And what's the difference between?
No, I'm going with it because.
What we're concerned about is the environment, is my sense of it. But
Okay.
Again, it doesn't mean.
Oh.
The point of it is what.
Carol, will you get on your microphone? The public needs to hear this.
Instead of just this stuff. I think the point of it is what's important. I think if somebody else has a big issue with one of those words, I don't have.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking that environment is more consistent with the phrase that generally.
Okay. And
more-
just a reminder, I'd say we're good on time. We want to take this, again, I would love to get the word right, because you know as well as I do, if this were in a full board meeting, we would spend a lot more time on these words. I do agree that all of these words would work pretty well. Excellence, environment, focus, achievement. What I'd like to do is in board meeting, when we take this to the full board and they say, why did you choose achievement? That we can say, or why do we choose focus or environment? We can say, this is why, because we've already thought about it and we've already belabored this. And
With that in mind, they're going to like excellence. Other board members will probably like that academic excellence phrase. So I think we stick with that and let's go forward.
Okay,
Make the motion.
please, Member Vice Chair Carey.
Environments too.
I would like to
Warm,
move that
fuzzy.
the committee before line 85 add a new subsection, I, significantly impair academic excellence.
Thank you, Vice Chair Carey. The motion before the committee is that the committee amend R277495 to add before line 85 a new subsection I that reads significantly impair academic excellence. And we'll give our staff a minute to get that ready. Any additional discussion to this motion? Seeing none, we will keep an eye on the screen for a vote. Member Lear, we are on the edge of our seat and it's unanimous. Thank you. Okay, perfect. Thank you. Okay, we have an underlying motion. And I'll go, yes, Member Wood.
Just a question where this was last approved in 2019. Two things. One was when the drafting and looking at no changes need to be made, did we look at any of the new social media? I mean, there were two new social media laws that came into effect. Were those looked at and said, are there any terms we need to update? Or also on line 88, C, inappropriate matter. Is that defined somewhere? We also have a real push with sensitive materials. I just, knowing the timing and what's happened in the last 5 years, it's hard for me to believe that nothing and nothing has changed in terms of technology and use. And if it hasn't, awesome, let's move forward. But just a question.
No, that's a great question. And Elise Newey, policy advisor, we looked at all of the federal, state, and other requirements and made sure that it was aligned with all of those before we went forward with the continuation. But as far as the second question, I'm going to pass that to Rick.
Sorry, this is Rick Gasford, Education Technology Specialist. And could you repeat that question? I had something that came in my earphone right at the very moment that question was coming in.
Just on line 88C, just the inappropriate matter.
I
If
think
there is a
that's
definition for that.
Probably matter would be content on the internet. I think that'd be the synonym that I would use for that. Matter. Probably. So it isn't probably a more odd word, but when I look at that, I would what I would be reading that as inappropriate content on the internet while using LEA equipment, that they're not going out and using it. The purpose of this particular rule is to make sure that we're compliant with both the Children's Internet Protection Act, CIPA, and also to make sure that we have the right policies in place for to be E-rate eligible, which is the funding mechanism to pay for the telecommunications costs for schools.
Does that answer your question, Member Wood? Kind of.
Kind of, yeah. I mean, I feel like it's content would be a better word, but also I don't know that it aligns with the terminology that we're using right now. But if there's no concerns, I will move ahead. So.
Yeah, as reading through this, I felt, and I know that nobody cares how I feel, but I felt that it was pretty general enough to cover these new things that pop up. Yeah. Please.
I just wanted to give a little bit of the not legislative, although there was legislative involvement in the background on this bill rule. I keep interchanging those today. I don't know why. Again, my head must be legislatively focused. But the reason this rule came into place wasn't because of legislation, but it was actually in lieu of legislation. So there was a potential that really, at the time, the legislators just wanted LEAs to have policies on it. And so they just wanted to say, hey, you need to create an electronic device policy. But the legislators weren't like wanting to micromanage it or be very specific. So the board at the time, board leadership said, let us take that. We will establish something in board rules so that you don't have to pass a bill. And so I wanted to share with you, the general intent was just to say, LEAs, please have a policy. And I think that's why, to Chair Hymas's point, general it was the intent at the time. It wasn't to get so specific that it made it so that you as a copy and paste of the rule into a policy. And so there will be opportunities for an LEAs to have very different, stricter or looser policies depending on the LEA's, desires.
Thank you. Member
Just a
Wood.
single follow-up. So because of this rule, we had Representative Lee had his cell phone bill. You're saying that bill was, and then it didn't go anywhere, but was completely unnecessary because we have this rule in place, or we could.
Well, that is a subjective question.
Yes,
I'm sure
sorry.
that,
and I'm not supposed to ask staff subjective
but I
questions.
also
Apologize.
This rule does not prohibit devices, right? It doesn't.
And his was.
It allows LEAs to make that determination. If an LEA wanted to say from 7:30 to 2:30, we do not allow devices on campus, or some might allow them on campus, but they can only use during the lunch hour. So it really depends on. That's just a subjective question.
I apologize.
Yeah.
Thank you. We are back to an original. Well, we never had an original motion. We're seeking.
I did change the motion.
Okay.
Let me clarify why this looks a little different, if I may. Sorry.
Please, yeah,
Okay, thank
go
you.
for it.
We didn't have a draft one to start with. It was just the rule. So you'll see that the motion just says that the committee continue and amend R277495 as amended on first reading, because we do have an amendment now that came as a result of Board Member Carey's motion. So there will be a draft 1 that will be prepared with that amendment in there. That will be the committee motion. And I did just want to give a heads up, because now this rule has been opened, quote unquote, there may be some additional staff suggestions, kind of in line with what Board Member Wood stated, which is, are there any things that could use a little bit of a touch up, since it's been a number of years now? And originally staff were thinking, well, let's just continue it for now. But now that it's open, staff may think of some additional amendments to propose, like matter to content. And so we'll just, but it'll be draft 1 at a committee, when that will be the motion that Board Member Hymas will make.
Thank you.
I was
Member
open
Wood,
to do that.
please.
Okay, I move that the committee continue and amend R277495.
Approve, actually.
Thank you. I'm like, wait. And approve R277495 as amended on first reading and forward to the board for continuation and approval on second and final reading.
Thank you, Member Wood. The motion before the committee is that the committee continue and approve R277-495 as amended on first reading and forward to the board for continuation and approval on second and final reading. Let's just, there it is on the screen. Looks like it passes unanimously. Thank you. Okay, on to agenda item 1.8. R277-551, Charter Schools General Provisions, and we have Ben Rasmussen to queue us up.
Thank you, Chair. We have 3 rules that deal with the charter school administration today, and I should introduce myself for the committee. Ben Rasmussen, Director of Law and Professional Practices. The first of those rules is R277-551. These rules are all up for their 5-year review, and so what we did is we went to the State Charter School Board and some of our finance staff that oversees charter schools and asked for feedback on these rules as to whether there were any changes that were appropriate, given that we would be reviewing them. The State Charter School Board did have some feedback on a couple of these rules, and so we've incorporated their feedback into some amendments for your consideration. In the 551 has a few of those changes recommended in them. You'll kind of see those throughout. There's some change. There's one change regarding the transportation procedures. The bigger changes deal with reporting threats and safety concerns to the State Charter School Board. There's Section 4 deals with implementation of a statute that requires there to be a process for that. The State Charter School Board recommended some changes based on how they were implementing this process at this time, and Marie Stephenson can speak to questions you have about that. They also made some recommendations regarding the content of websites for charter schools, and those have been implemented as well, or at least recommended in this draft as well. So I'd be happy to answer any questions you have about this draft today.
Thank you. Committee members, any questions that you might have? We'll just give a second. Member Lear.
I was really fine with all of these changes. I just was curious about why there was the recommendation of removing that transportation expectation on line.
You asked me a question. Can you
Yeah, I just was curious why that line 34 was struck and 5.
My understanding was that isn't really, there's only, that wasn't really applicable at this point. It was based on a recommendation from Ron Litchfield, the charter school, there's not really charter schools getting this funding was my recollection. I don't remember a lot of the detail, but it was Ron Litchfield, who's our transportation specialist, recommended that we delete that language.
Well, they've never received transportation funds, right?
Yes.
All right, I think the key though is it says except as provided in 53F 5 to 11. So let me look at that.
Oh, that's
53F.
yeah.
Oops.
So
I think
maybe-
that program was a 53.5 to 11
gotcha. That's-
might just be gone.
I think that says it all, Angie. That's
Yeah. Yeah, it's
In
good.
fact, now that you mention that, you're right, Angie. We noticed that reference was missing, and so we kind of asked Ron what the situation was there, and he just recommended that we.
Yeah, it's been
delete that.
repealed. Yeah.
Thank you.
Please, Member Lear.
I move that the committee continue and approve R277511 draft 1 on first reading and forward to the board for continuation and approval on second and final reading.
Thank you, Member Lear. I got a look from Ben, so.
I guess there's just a question. Board Member Carey had some questions on section 4 for the audit team, and there was some talk about continuing the rule today and maybe bringing back for changes there if the committee wanted to. He's not here today to raise those concerns, but I think Debbie may still have some, or Audit Director Davis may have some concerns there.
Okay, yeah, Director Davis, if you will, I think this will be helpful if it does come before, if we pass it here and it comes before the full board, I think some background will be helpful.
Not the right button. Okay. And so Debbie Davis, Chief Audit Executive for the board, and we were looped on this very late in the process, like Wednesday afternoon. So I was not aware that there were provisions in the rule that would impact internal audit. But in section 4, you'll note regarding reports of threats, they indicate the state charter school board will provide the audit and fraud forms. I assume that means the public education hotline report a concern form. The problem is that form is not set up, nor was it intended to receive reports of concerns that LEAs receive, nor and it doesn't include how those LEAs are remedying the steps they took to remedy the threat they received, which is what is required in the statute. So I don't think it's appropriate to include that the board's audit and fraud form, which that's an incorrect term, would be the vehicle or the tool to receive the report of the threat that is received by the LEA. The hotline form would be about 3 steps in front of this reporting requirement that's recorded in statute. So we're a little bit concerned with that. And then reading through that section, once this was on my radar, we have several other questions about how you would implement what's in rule, how an LEA would implement that. Like, how do you define threat? Concerns about who the individual is, if there's alignment with other parts of statute and rule regarding the terminology used. So we're pretty uncomfortable with the language in line 48 and 49 in particular, but I think there's other concerns with that section that should be addressed.
Deputy Stallings would, or Director Rasmussen, wouldn't, are they confusing the threat assessment form that comes out of the school safety documents that we do through CSTAG and other?
This was essentially, and maybe we should ask Murray Stephenson from the
okay,
Charter
yeah.
Board to reply
Good
to this,
idea.
because they suggested this language based, they said this was roughly what they were doing right now. So maybe Murray can provide us some additional insight there as to how they're
Okay.
handling these.
Okay.
Yes, I believe there was some confusion on the different forms. As you know, we've had 3 different leadership levels of individuals leave in the last 2 months. And so trying to fill in the different pieces, I think it was just a misunderstanding. And our office has said that we would love to work more closely with the various departments at USBE and make sure that we have a clear picture of what's going on and what needs to be included in that section.
Thank you. Member Lear?
So if there's no urgency on this, can we just give you another month to get it cleaned up and have it be appropriate or have it be right between the charter section and the audit section and the USBE, so that whatever forms there are right, and if there aren't forms, and if those should go to the board versus the school. Anyway, can you just get it straight in a month?
I think what we would ask, if the committee is not inclined to make the amendments today, that you continue the rule today, and then we could get with the state charter school board and with the audit team, and we could bring back some amendments that would kind of clean this up. Or it sounds like we may even need to do a policy request or something for the legislature to figure out how to do this. So
That's what I'm asking.
It's time sensitive. We need to.
it is going to be up for continuation. So.
Okay. So if we continue it, and remember, Larry, is it okay if I jump in?
Sure.
If we continue it and we pass it through as committee, is there concern that the work won't be done? And if it does go through as is that going to be okay? That's the risk that we take, right? Is we say, okay, if we're going to pass it through committee and we hope that changes will happen within that month, if they don't happen, are we still in a okay spot, not a good spot?
If the changes aren't made, what I'm telling you is there is no way to comply with the proposed language. It won't happen, so there will be non-compliance with the rule.
So how do we ensure that?
Get it right.
Well, okay.
So I think what we're asking is, if there's concern here, we can continue without any changes, and we won't have any issue there. But we'll figure out a way forward on that issue and bring it back. We'll bring the amendments back. But we would just continue. It would not make any of the amendments. We'd just bring it back for amendments later.
Right. I guess my concern is
that would be a good position legally, and would avoid the risks that the audit team has identified.
okay. I guess I'm just wondering, is there anything that we can do today to help with the process? That's my underlying question. Instead of just moving it on and saying good luck, is there anything the committee can do that will? Both of those motions, or okay. So we have two potential motions from staff, and I haven't read them yet. Just give me a second, please.
Can I make a comment with you?
Please. Member Hart.
I just clicked on the rule, and what we're not the rule, the statute. What we're trying to comply with is a simple sentence that says, the state board shall make rules that require a charter school to report any threats to the health, safety, or welfare of its students to the state charter school board in a timely manner. We're doing this with our threat assessment work that we're doing. It's a simple fix. We just submit the threat assessment documents to the charter school board. It's not complicated.
It's also meant to be an opportunity for anybody to report, like a parent or an administrator or a student, to say, hey, ABC charter school has significant bullying. So we did have.
Don't we have the hotline though for that?
Well, but this is a statutory requirement. We didn't have the hotline necessarily. I'm showing this right now. It says, in accordance, anyway, the state board shall make rules that require a charter school to report threats to the state charter school board. And so that is not just the threat assessment. It would be also individual. I think that's what it was meant to be, was for people to be able to report threats to the health, safety, or welfare of the charter school students. But it to be anybody, not just the official threat assessment that is more of a.
So it's also Safe UT and hotline concerns, but the hotline concerns, but okay, I understand now. The charter hotlines are coming to us.
So I think, is it okay if I speak, Chair? I think the confusion's coming. Yes, we have the hotline. The hotline receives concerns. We get concerns, and generally we refer that to the LEA. So if we received a threat, whatever it is, we'll send it to the LEA. the way we're reading statute is it says make rules that require a charter school to report the threats and also require the charter school report to include what steps they took to remedy the threat.
Okay.
So the hotline's taking the initial concern, sending it to the LEA. They're going to look at it and do something. And then that is the report they're sending back. So it's that piece that's the concern, not the initial, yes, we'll absolutely get it. But the hotline does not generally get concerns about anything from LEAs. I'm racking my brain trying to think of one and I can't think. Usually it's an individual, it could be an employee, but we don't generally receive concerns from the LEA and we don't generally ever get the steps they took to remedy the situation. The form is not set up to do that. So it's those two things.
But once that hotline is made,
Mhm.
it's forwarded to the LEA.
Mhm.
The LEA then has to deal with that,
Mhm.
and they deal with that through the threat assessment. So I get it. And so now I'm clear now.
Can we, so this goes, charter school has to send it back to the state charter school board. Should it not say authorizer? Do we need to change that in code?
I think so, but I'm not the policymaker.
Yeah, we can make that.
Can we work on that? I don't know how to make that official, but
What?
I know, right?
Just
When does this sunset?
fortunately,
When?
508 is type Silo B to type Silo C, so let them just do that.
So I'm wondering with these motions that are potential here, since we don't have anything on the floor yet. One of the potential motions is to continue the rule, not draft one. Is that right?
Correct. Mhm. And it would be, and if you do that, just remember, it'd just be the existing rule as is that does not have anything to do with internal audit. So if you look at the language, sorry, where am I? Section 4. Currently, it says the state charter school board shall provide reports received to the superintendent. So there's no involvement currently in 551 with internal audit. And so if you continue the rule, I think that's what Director Davis is stating. Would be preferable rather than trying to move something that involves internal audit right now until that gets resolved.
Is it possible to send forth the draft one, but leave section 4?
Out, you mean?
Unchanged, leave section 4 unchanged, but the rest of the rule, or is that?
Yeah.
It'd just be easier to do just a continuation here and then bring them all back. Okay. With that, then I'll make a motion here, and I move that the committee continue R2775-551 on first reading and forward to the board for continuation on second and final reading. And I'm not going to repeat that. Is there discussion to that motion? Member Wood.
Can we also in that direct staff to, or will they just know that because it needs changed?
So would that be 2 separate motions, or would that be?
Yes, it would.
So let's look on this motion, and then there's a second motion that says the committee direct staff.
Right. Okay. So just do it separately.
Yeah,
That's
we'll
fine.
just do it separately.
Okay.
So the motion on the floor and on your screen is that the committee continue R277-551 on first reading and forward to the board for continuation on second and final reading. Committee members, please vote. And that passes with 4 yes votes and 1 absent. Member Carey is absent. Member Wood.
I'd like to make the second motion. I move that the committee direct staff to work with board internal audit staff and bring back an updated amendments to R277-551 at a future committee meeting.
Thank you, Member Wood. I'm going to restate the motion and then we'll have discussion. The motion on the floor is that the committee direct staff to work with board internal audit staff and bring back updated amendments to R277-551 at a future committee meeting. Discussion to that motion, Member Lear.
Again, without overcomplicating this, and with audit staff and others as necessary. I mean, if we,
Put the mic closer to you.
oh, is it okay to say with the audit staff and others is necessary, or do we have enough? If the motion is supposed to be exact, and you want direction, then
If we direct the audit staff, I'm confident that they would reach out to those that they need to work with. So we're just saying essentially the audit is taking control of this. Is that what we're saying? Are we happy with that committee?
not really, but they're probably not.
If you'd like
Okay.
to make an amendment, we're happy to do it.
No, never mind. Thanks. I just want to make sure they can talk to everybody this time and come back with.
Okay.
And come back with all parties having
Thank you.
discussed and processed and.
You started a comment, turned
I
off your
know.
microphone midway and then turned it back on. We missed the middle part. Okay, so the motion before the committee is that the committee directs staff to work with board internal audit staff and bring back updated amendments to R277-551 at a future committee meeting. Please vote. And that passes with 4 yes votes and 1 absence from member Carey. Thank you. Okay. Yes, there's one more motion that I'm going to put before the committee. I move that the committee recommends that the board direct staff to work with the legislature to amend subsection 53G-5-504, section 4, to amend the reference to the state charter school board to the charter schools authorizer. And just speaking to this, we just approved another authorizer. There's more than just the state charter school board. Hopefully this could be a quick fix and we could get it right. So that's the motion. I'll repeat it while Kelsey gets it ready for us to vote on, but the motion before the committee is that the committee recommends that the board direct staff to work with the legislature to amend subsection 53G-5-504, section 4, to amend the reference to the state charter school board to the charter schools authorizer. Committee members, please vote. That passes with 4 yes votes and 1 absent from member Carey. Okay, thank you. Let's move on to agenda item 1.9, R277-553, charter school oversight, monitoring, and appeals. And this goes back to Ben.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just going to take control of the screen here because Angie has to leave. Okay. So our next rule up R277-553 is the rule that governs how charter authorizers oversee and monitor their charter schools. This is another one that's up for its five-year review. There are a couple of technical changes here. The primary substantive change you'll see what we've got on the screen is on around lines 42 through 47. Just covers when charter authorizers, how charter authorizers oversee their charter schools. And I'm just trying to think, we had, did we put up a second draft on this? I thought we had talked about a second draft on here, but don't see it on the screen here. But essentially the language there you see on 42 through 47 talks about how often they monitor schools. We talked about doing an amendment on line 45 that basically would essentially change that. So every 5 years, an authorizer may review and update the charter agreement as necessary. There was a little concern from board member Carey as we talked about it that was too prescriptive. So that might be an amendment that the committee could consider. It doesn't look like we have it on the screen on Civic Clerk, but we talked about that. Do you have any other questions about this particular rule?
Can we bring up that amendment and I'll speak to it? Because I agree
I
with.
do have that in the motions document. I'm sorry.
Do ya? Okay.
That's on your screen there, that we had talked about amending 45 to read, review the charter agreement and recommend updates as needed.
So can we go back, Ben? We're going to have to jump for just a second. Let's look at line 45. Line 45 says review and update the charter agreement. The what is that statute? Just says review and evaluate. Doesn't have update in there at all. And so we didn't want to have that conflict. And so the thought was that if we review and then the authorizer is going to see if updates are needed and they can make recommendations. So it's not in law, but it is something that I think charters would appreciate if they say, oh yeah, you know what, we're outdated there. So here's an update that we want to make. So if we jump back to if we're looking at line 45, review and update, where the motion that I'll put before the committee is that the committee, it's all right, that the committee amend line 45 to read, review the charter agreement and recommend updates as needed. So discussion to that motion, Member Wood.
So are you maintaining 42 that says every 5 years?
Yeah, yes. So so they have to review it every 5 years.
Okay, so they're still looking at it.
Absolutely, yes.
You're just saying they would update it as needed.
Yeah, so the law says review and evaluate. And so review and update it doesn't align well.
Okay. Because as I recall, when there was a bill that came out that was trying to put some parameters around charter schools, and there were a number, even I think the original charter school of Utah was not open to that. They had not updated their charter for like however long charter schools have existed, 20 years, 30 years. So I do have some concerns with the as needed, because that's kind of a subjective. The bigger picture might say, yeah, you need to update. You've been doing the same thing and it's not working. But that charter school says, no, we're going to plug along and do as we see fit.
Please.
Just to that point, the statute is very clear that there has to be kind of a meeting of the minds. They have to agree if there's going to be an amendment to the charter agreement. And so, I mean, if a school just doesn't want to cooperate, once the agreement's in place, they can stick to their guns there. But we're just trying to point out that they should evaluate this and that they should talk about changes if they're warranted.
So this at least sets that 5-year parameter. You need to be looking at this, and then they do have that autonomy and ability to stick to their course if that's what they believe in. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, Member Hart.
Well, and just to be clear, the charter school in themselves can't decide that. The authorizer decides whether or not it gets updated. So it's every 5 years, an authorizer shall conduct and document a comprehensive review of governing board performance and review the charter agreement. So the charter school still has.
Thank you. That is a great clarification that I was not.
Yeah.
Not being in the charter school world, that authorizer versus the school thank you. Yeah. That is a great clarification.
And I do know that what the OLAG just did something, and I know there are a lot of findings in there, and I don't know what's come of it yet. So, okay.
And also note that if they're high schools or if they choose district accreditation, they also go through accreditation as well. So, I mean, there's plenty of eyes on this. It's not like they're rogue. I mean.
Yeah. So let's turn it back to the motion that's on the floor here. And the motion is that the committee amend line 45 to read, review the charter agreement and recommend updates as needed. If we're ready to vote, please do so on the screen. It looks like that passes with 4 yes votes and 1 absence from Vice Chair Carey. And let's go back to the potential underlying motion then. Do we have any, is there somebody who would like to make a motion? Is there other comments before we make this underlying motion? Member Lear? Please.
I move that the committee continue and approve R277553 draft 1 as amended. Is that right? On first on first reading and forward to the board for continuation and approval on second and final reading.
Thank you, Member Lear. The committee moves that the motion before the floor, or the motion on the floor is that the committee, I'm sorry, I had a cramp in there. I don't know what just happened. Let me restart. No, I can see it. I just started talking. Oh my. The motion on the floor is that the committee continue and approve R277-553 draft 1 as amended on first reading and forward to the board for continuation and approval on second and final reading. Please vote. And that passes 4 yes votes with 1 absent from Member Carey. Thank you, committee members. Let's move on to agenda item 1.10, R277-555, corrective action against charter school authorizers. This is a continuation, and Ben Rasmussen will cue us up.
Yeah, this one is another one that's up for its 5-year review, like you mentioned. This is the rule that the board would use if it had corrective action to take against the charter school authorizer. No changes to recommend here, just asking for a continuation.
Thank you, Member Lear.
Oh, I'm sorry, but I will make a motion.
I am ready.
In that case, I move that the committee continue R277-555 on first reading and forward to the board for continuation on second and final reading.
Thank you, Member Lear. The motion before the committee is that the committee continue R277-555 on first reading and forward to the board for continuation on second and final reading. Committee members, please vote. And that looks like it passes with 4 in the affirmative and 1 absent from Member Carey. Moving on and away from charter schools for a minute. Yeah, this is, we are on agenda item, and thank you, Marie, if you're still on, for joining us and being available for those questions. Agenda item 1.11, R2, yeah, thank you. Agenda item 1.11, R277-210, Utah Professional Practices Advisory Commission, UPAC definitions, and Ben, please.
Thank you, Chair. So we'll now on to everybody's favorite topic, which is UPAC. 210 is our definitions rule, and this sets forth the definitions that we use in the UPAC's rule, the UPAC rules. As a little bit of background, I've got on your screen the presumptions that apply in cases involving student boundary issues. So there are a few different disciplines that can come down in these cases. And the reason why this definitions rule is coming up is primarily the distinction between what leads to a reprimand and what leads to a 1 to 3 year suspension. So you'll see that when there's minor misconduct that is repetitive, the presumption is that that can be a reprimand. That's a newer presumption. The older presumption on boundary violations is the 1 to 3 year suspension, that if there's a pattern of boundary violations, that can lead to a 1 to 3 year suspension. So the question that has come up recently, or not recently, but frequently, is what is the distinction between when something is repetitive and when there's a pattern? You'll remember that we had a case just yesterday in executive session where this kind of question came into play, where there were more than one boundary violation that the educator had committed. And you have the question is, when does this change from the reprimand level to the suspension level? And so what I'm asking the committee to do today is to approve amendments to R277-210, the definition of boundary violation, to kind of provide some criteria for UPAC and the board that UPAC and the board would use when looking at those specific cases. And so what I've got here is that we've added language that says repetitive is generally when the violation occurs more than once, but then add some factors for the committee to consider when they're looking at whether it should be elevated to a pattern. That could include there's more than one student involved. There's different types of violations, whether that be sending emails, giving gifts, different types of violations, whether there's been warnings from the LEA. So different conditions that if they're there, this is an absolute, but it's factors that UPAC can consider to determine when a suspension is more appropriate because a pattern exists. I've crafted this taking input from my attorneys, from the members of the UPAC Commission, also sought feedback from UEA, from Board Member Lear, who's got experience on this. And so we've tried to craft this with feedback from all those groups, and be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Member Hart.
I don't believe I have questions. I just have a comment. I really appreciate this coming because I think any sort of framework or guidelines contribute to a more structured decision, a more defensible decision, and quite frankly, an easier decision. And those degrees are it's never going to be easy, but it's easier when you have a framework. So I really appreciate this coming forward.
Thank you, Member Lear.
And I have to say, appreciation to Ben for being patient as some of us talked through it with him. And I think we came up with, this is just, in my mind, this was such a good example, and you didn't necessarily see the earlier drafts, but I think this is a real improvement on the earlier drafts. And I really like that it said that these are examples, is aggravated by circumstances, including, so it could be other circumstances, which I really like. And I just think this was a really thoughtful improvement on what came before. So, and these are, I started with saying they're sort of just words, repetitive pattern, distinctions without differences. But I think this is something that might help the commission decide if it should be a more serious penalty, or is this just a couple of instances that the teacher's not getting it. So I like the improvement.
Thank you. And I think it's important to know that for everybody, it's easy. When I mentioned discussing this definitions of repetitive and pattern, initially people are like, it's the same thing, but it's not. There is so much gray area in this and what UPAC has to deal with. And so it's not just as simple as saying, oh, here's a case, you know what, that's a repetitive pattern. Like a lot goes into this. And so to see this come forth and to see the work that has gone on behind it, just kind of, I hope that we as committee members, later as board members, and that they already do, and even the public recognizes the amount of information and detail and time and energy that it goes into making these UPAC recommendations. And it is really sought out, and they seek out definitions on their own, and just the nuances are overwhelming for me anyway. I know Ben and his team has been doing this for a long time, so we're glad to have them. Anyway, Member Wood.
Just a comment. I really appreciate lines 83 through 85, where it talks about the documented warnings. That was one thing I was looking at is, have there been cases where they tried to help and support the teacher ahead of time and those didn't stick? So I really appreciate that addition.
And credit for that goes to Board Member Lear.
And the UEA folks we worked with is to make it fair, because there's such a balance. You're exactly right. No one wants, I've said this for 30 years, no one wants bad teachers in a classroom. On the other hand, I think fundamental fairness is just a basic right. I don't care if it's a bad guy, care if there's a problem, you still want fundamental fairness. And I think that provides the requirement of notice to the teacher, however dense that teacher maybe seems to some people. The idea that they're informed about the problems, and then keep doing it, then you can see a bigger problem. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you for those comments, committee members. Member Hart?
I'm just ready to make the motion if there's no other questions.
Please.
Okay. I I move that the committee approves R277-210, draft 1 on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading.
Thank you, Member Hart. The motion before the committee is that the committee approves R277-210, draft 1 on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading. Please vote. Looks like that passes with 4 in favor and 1 absent from Member Carey. Thank you. Okay, our final agenda item. This is agenda item 1.12, R277-211, Utah Professional Practices Advisory Commission, again, UPAC, Rules of Procedure, Notification to Educators, Complaints, and Final Disciplinary Actions. And again, we have Ben Rasmussen to cue us up.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So this is kind of a procedural rule for UPAC. It talks about a lot of the procedures we follow in sending out complaints, setting hearings, negotiating agreements with educators, doing defaults. I basically opened this rule because there were a couple of substantive things that I wanted to address and then a few technical changes you'll see throughout, mostly stylistic things, but a couple of substantive things that have been included just on line 112 through and 113. I'll just point that out. We've never charged a fee to anybody for their discovery in the time I've been over UPAC. I don't foresee the time when that provision is necessary, so I'm just recommending that that be deleted. The other substantive change is the one that's there was comment on from UEA, and so I'd just like to address why that is being proposed today, and that you'll see starting on lines, let's see, where did it, 296, yeah, start 296 and 297. So there's a provision in code 53E6603 that talks about when an educator is ineligible for an educator license or to be reinstated for a license, that educator, the public school cannot employ the educator or allow the educator to volunteer in the school. We currently have provisions in our consents to discipline that basically suggest that as the executive secretary of UPAC, I can grant an exception to the suspension to allow an educator to work or volunteer in a public school if the educator requests it. I've long thought that that provision is inconsistent with this statute because this statute says it's basically flat out they can't do it. And so I don't like being put in the position of being asked to grant an exception to the statute, which I don't feel like I can grant. And so that's why I put this, or am requesting that the board make this change, because I think that's pretty black and white in the statute. I don't know if there's a lot of room to negotiate there because of the way the statute is written. We'll say that this is not a time-sensitive change, so I do understand that UEA would like us to take more time on this, and I'm open to whatever the committee suggests there. But I would just point out that that's why that's being included here, is because this is, in my view, this is black and white, and this is just something we need to change to comply with the law. But I'm open to the committee's feedback and happy to answer your questions.
So Ben, I just clicked on the statute. If you just pull it up just so we can see. I mean, it is a hard argument. So I know that there's I know there's concern. Well, you know what? Let me open it up to any comments. I know. Member Lear?
Leanne just said what I think all of us are thinking. We don't want to be contrary to the statute. We can't. On the other hand, it seems like, and I'm not positive of this is where I think our discussion might go in the next, or the discussion, whoever's involved might go in the next couple of weeks. There's some discussion about the maze. If you read further up on the in the statute, there are a lot of maze, and NG schooled us about maze for years. Some of them mean can, and some of them are truly discretionary. And I think there is not a meeting of the minds right now between UEA, who represents 50% of the teachers, and Mr. Rasmussen, who's largely directs as supervision over this area. So I think that understanding what those mays allow and don't allow would benefit all of us. And if it's truly that it's something he can't do, but somehow the UEA General Counsel had the idea that he had discretion, and those consents to discipline included that discretion for a period of time. I don't know if it's been years or months or what. So somehow that needs to be reconciled, and somehow the UEA General Counsel has to deal with some of the consents to discipline that exist that were signed mutually. So I think discussing this for another month would benefit everyone and allow both parties, both representatives to be comfortable with the result, rather than doing something today, even if it seems crystal clear to us. Just that discussion time, as I see it, would mean we discuss it now, make a decision in October, and then we're not delayed by ideally, and there's nobody can promise or assure, but we wouldn't have a administrative hearing that the procedures allow for, which would delay things 2 or 3 months and take the board's time. I just think there needs to be time for discussion.
Can I ask a question of Director Rasmussen, Ben? So the law says under 3, it says if an individual is ineligible for licensure under the subsections 1 and 2, and the subsections give a pretty clear picture of what offenses must take place. Whereas the rule just reads if for suspension or revocation. So just for clarity, do we revoke or suspend licenses that would fall outside of these 2 subsections in 53E 6603?
In my view, all of our actions fall squarely under 1B there, where we're talking about denying an educator their license because of violations of standards of ethical conduct, performance, or professional competence. So I think all of our actions fall squarely under that subsection would be my reading.
So any revocation or suspension just usually does not go on beyond 1B. So forget 2, right? It doesn't even make it.
It may implicate 2 as well, but they all implicate
1B encompasses. Yeah. So I guess the question is, because I don't know how to argue this and say, yeah, we need to change it, quite frankly. But the question is, how much? It's a time thing, kind of like Member Lear mentioned. I'm curious, and I wish we could have more conversation, and we need to have more conversation offline. I guess that's your point, is maybe we need to have more conversation. But from where I'm sitting, I don't see where it would be changed. How would we change our rule as it's being presented here? I don't see how it could be changed to anything else.
And I'm just saying, then why are there consents to discipline that suggested that the executive director has discretion? Because they're signed by both parties. It's not something UEA just gives its clients and says, hey, look, you've got this little teeny sliver of hope here. Somehow there was a misunderstanding at some point, or maybe at some point there. I just think that needs to be reprocessed. I'm not necessarily sure where it'll land. I just feel like 2 weeks is better than 2 or 3 months. And discussion is worth that if there's no time sensitivity of that. Yes.
Looks like we have Member Hart first and then Member Wood.
And I don't want these individuals in my schools volunteers, period. Volunteers already are not always trained. They have a minimum amount of experience, that you don't know what experiences they're bringing. You don't know this person. You didn't interview them. They aren't necessarily coming with a license. I see no reason to discuss this any further. I mean, it's fine. I'll do whatever, but we have plenty of rules where we take, regardless of what the may or the shall, we have plenty of rules where we've made adjustments or had a higher standard that we set. And quite frankly, I don't want anybody to sign anything that says these folks can come in and into the school while something is pending. I don't think that's safe. Regardless of may, shall, regardless of the law, I don't want it. So I'll wait, but I'm pretty resolute, and I'm just stating my position. I think this is very clear. I don't think that our hearing officers or our staff should be making that call. I don't think that it should be allowed. And I think it puts us at enormous risk when we're allowing these individuals knowingly into our building.
Thank you. I know that Member Lear has a comment. Member Wood, if you want to go first, or if you want to talk with Member Lear and say, you go first, I don't care. I just know
Okay,
both
go
of you.
ahead.
Okay.
I was going to give some examples that somebody may not have thought of. Not all of these are in the building. And not all of them are volunteers. And I can give you some examples, and maybe it doesn't change your mind, but I'm not talking into my mic probably. But so if Leanne has a different question.
I do have a question just from my having not been involved yet in a public hearing. Can someone explain to me how this, because that was kind of the notice that, well, if you go through with this, this is where this is going to go. So I know that you have to have a number of community involvement that request it, and it's more than a single entity. Is that correct?
So there's a statute on requesting a hearing. A group of individuals or a certain number, I think, or minimum of 10 individuals have to request a hearing.
Oh, okay.
For the board to schedule one. UEA is a big enough group that they can request a hearing if they want to.
Okay.
And then if they request a hearing, there are certain procedures that we follow for that.
So then when you compare what is in law, which is pretty explicit there, and our rule, what grounds would there be to then undo if it's already in statute? If there's no play here, it's there. What leads us as a body to go, oh yes, we hear what you say, we're going to change this? And I know that's but what are some examples of where this changes based on these public hearings?
Well, a public hearing, whoever requests the hearing can ask the board just not to adopt the rule, or they can suggest different language. I don't know if Ms. Watson has something that she would suggest as far as different language.
Okay.
She might have some after she studies this out a little further, as she's indicated. To me, as we've discussed, there's not a lot of wiggle room here to change, but that is something that could be discussed at a public.
That they may have.
public
Okay.
hearing.
Thank you. That's my learning curve.
Thanks, Member Wood. Can I ask, part of this goes to Member Lear, because you've worked with Tracy and Ben on, I don't know about this one, on the previous one. Did you guys work together? I don't know who's worked all on this.
I'll admit that I thought this was pretty straightforward, and so I didn't give them a lot of heads
And
up.
that's the point. We didn't have a chance to really discuss
So
this.
I'm wondering then, as we've done with other agenda items, if this pushes through committee here, is that 30 days not enough time to work and bring something to the full board? And I direct that to you, Member Lear, again, as one, you don't represent the UEA.
No, for sure.
But it's clear that you have connections with them, or not. I don't even want to say connections.
I'm
I
not
don't want to
offended
put
by,
any.
unlike others, I'm not offended by that. They are people I've worked with for 20 years.
Right.
I feel a real connection. I'm a teacher myself who used to belong to the UEA.
Yeah, I
so-
just don't want to put you in the representative light, because you're not, but you
No.
you have worked with them, you understand them better than most.
I feel it's a really great group that provides support to teachers who otherwise wouldn't have support. So I
So
don't
would
have
30
any problem with that. My concern is I just prefer the sausage making to happen in committee as opposed to waiting to go to the board with new ideas that the committee may or may not like or have approved of or thought about. I like to have 5 people having processed something as much as possible. That's my druthers. But let me I wanted to kind of switch over a little bit. I hope that's a good enough answer. That's just my preference. Of course. I mean, and I don't hear that comment from General Counsel of UEA as a threat at all. It's more just she represents individuals that would expect her to do everything possible to support them and represent them. And that would include requesting a hearing. So it's not a mean-spirited threat at all. It's just what procedures are there to bring this to the attention of the board and the public. But let me just give another example. And these aren't apocryphal. These are actually situations I've seen where a person's license is suspended for embezzlement or maybe some domestic violence sounds a little more threatening or concerning, but sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's just what law enforcement does when it finds 2 parties in a dispute. So person could be convicted of a white collar crime, embezzlement, or something similar, and then want to come to work at the district as a bus mechanic. So he's not in the classroom. She's not in the classroom, but trying to support the family. And in a small town, that might be the largest employer. So that's just one example. Or sometimes a janitor in a different school, not to say that janitors don't interact with students sometimes, or sometimes more in a capacity that is outside of the school, even away from students. I've had examples of former teachers who wanted to become electricians or construction people working for the school off hours. So there are many examples of, in addition to a grandparent who's convicted or even found administratively guilty of something, who wants to volunteer in his granddaughter's classroom that may not be, again, remote from what actually happened. So there are some examples that are more sympathetic. They may not even be possible, but I just want to allow for that discussion time because the last time it was very productive.
Yeah, and I appreciate the examples that I go back to the law, 1B, where it says considered as behavior of an educator to be immoral, unprofessional, or incompetent behavior, or a violation of standards of ethical conduct. I mean, performance or professional competence. I think, Ben makes a valid point when he says everything kind of falls under those anyway. So I think even some of those examples we can see, well, that's just immoral, unprofessional, or incompetent behavior, right? Or other. If I speak personally as one committee member, I don't mind taking time on this. I don't know if I've been convinced or if I will be convinced to change it away from how it's read. However, I don't mind taking time. As a personal experience, I sat down with a member of the UEA, and went in with a mindset and came out with a different one. So anything's possible. I shouldn't say that, huh? But I appreciate, I guess what I'm getting at is I appreciate the work that our USBE staff has put into this. I appreciate aligning with the law. But I'm also a fan of organizations who represent people, constituents, teachers, educators in all areas, of having the time and voice to reach out. So I'll leave that comment.
And so I'll make a motion if, let me just mention one other thing that's, again, I don't there are these consent decrees that either represent misunderstandings or whatever with some individuals that don't seem now consistent with the law in terms of how it's being interpreted today by the powers that be. So somehow those have to be resolved. And could they be lawsuits of expectations that were legally given to people if somehow we don't resolve this? Yes, possibly. Do we want more of those? No. Would we rather find a way to discuss and resolve? I think we absolutely would. So that's also part of my concern, is a little bit of some concern about the liability for something that's happened in the past where there was reliance on those particular consent decrees or those particular expectations.
Thank you, Member Laird.
Detrimental reliance is what it's called in the law.
Thank you. I know you have a motion. Before we get to that,
Ben
can we
wanted
just
to
hear
say
from Ben and then we'll go back to you?
Just one point on these existing consents to discipline or agreements that we have with educators. These amendments would change the rule going forward. We'd still have to interpret those agreements, under whatever law was existing in place at the time they were executed. I think the statute still is going to govern those, but the changes that I'm asking the committee to make today would have no impact on existing consents to discipline.
Maybe that's an understanding that UEA doesn't have, and because I hadn't really heard that expressly from Ben before. So my motion would be to postpone the conclusion of this discussion until the October committee meeting.
Member Lear, does that motion look correct on the screen?
Yes.
Do we need to say October committee or does it not matter?
Well, just because I'd prefer it to be discussed in committee.
You
as
want it to come
opposed-
back to committee?
I'd like it to come back to
specifically.
committee
Okay.
for, again, because I think that's a cleaner process than hashing stuff out in board meeting.
Okay. So the motion before the committee is that the committee postpone consideration of R277-211 to the October Law and Licensing Committee meeting. Discussion to that motion? I just want to, and there might be additional discussion. I just want to ask Ben, again, you mentioned that this was not time sensitive. I mean, of course, we'd like to get it through. There's considerations that if we don't postpone, it could take longer anyway. So I think timeliness is not a factor here, right? So I guess I'm inclined to support this motion and offer those who have thoughts or at least want to gain clarity that additional time to do so. Member Hart, you have a comment or a question?
Yeah, I fully accept that this probably will pass, but I do want to just put on record that I just respectfully I'm not going to vote for it. I think the risk is too high for me. It's just, I'm not comfortable with having any individual that we knowingly have concerns about ethical behavior anywhere in a system, in a public school system. One, I don't think, I think the risk is too high. I think, so I'm just not comfortable with it. So I offer that respectfully. I understand there's little harm in waiting. I just, some things just hit your ethical boundaries, and this just happens to be one for me. So I just wanted to share that.
Thank you, Member Hart. Ben, this isn't something new. Are people volunteering right now? Tell me what's going on right now. Again, we're talking about but we're talking about the timeliness issue. We're saying it's not time sensitive. So I can't imagine that we're just saying, oh yeah, you've got this conviction or you've lost your license because of this, you're welcome, right? Can you help us understand? Because I think Member Hart makes a good point here is we don't want to open up our classrooms, but are our classrooms open currently?
I would say that a few times a year I'll get some kind of a request from an educator. This week, actually, I got a request from an educator who has requested to have her license reinstated. She said she was working with a program that goes into the schools, and they wanted her to go into the school and volunteer and teach some sort of a lesson in conjunction with their program. And so she made a request of me, and I've said, I'm sorry, the statute won't allow it. But I get that kind of request 2 or 3 times a year.
And the answer is simply, I'm sorry, the statute won't allow it.
That's the approach that I've taken.
Which would be appropriate in my understanding as well, and probably Molly's as well, but we don't have the rule that backs that up right now. Is that what we're saying?
Correct.
Right now they get to go to
This is we've been doing this with consents to discipline, or what used to be called stipulated agreements, as long as I've been in the job. I'm not sure what the impetus was where they first came up with this language, but we've been using this language forever. I think there were a couple exceptions I may have granted early on before I saw this statute. But when I saw this statute, to me, that was kind of the.
So this won't necessarily change anything. It will just clarify that they don't even need to go to you.
Expectation.
Okay. So Member Wood had a comment, and then Member Hart, are you okay? We'll go
Yeah,
Member Wood first, and then to Member
yeah.
Hart.
I will be voting in opposition to this just because as I see it, the law is what the law is. And then I did actually try to write, I'm like, well, maybe we can, listening to the examples, I can see that the bus garage, the custodian, but then so I said, well, maybe they shouldn't have contact with children. Could we put them in an administrative office? But then in some of the experiences that we have looked at, that there are opportunities where this unethical behavior has been adult to adult. And so then, okay, we're going to expose other adults to behavior that has been inappropriate and unkind. And so I will, this gives 30 days. If Member Lear wanted to make changes and bring them to the board, maybe there would be something that would change my mind. But at this point, I will not be voting for this motion.
I have had different situations. I've encountered different situations. I'm aware of different situations where somebody is taken out of a classroom and sent to the bus garage, or but to me it's an issue of judgment, and it's an issue of risk. And when I have a higher standard there. So I do understand there's different situations, but
Member Hart, can we, I'm sorry, I'm going to direct you
Yes.
back to the motion.
Yeah,
Postponing.
and I don't think that I think it sends the wrong message when we talk about wanting to postpone, because even when I use those examples to try to test my position stays the same.
Thank you. I appreciate the discussion on this. The motion before the committee then is that the committee postpone consideration of R277-211 to the October Law and Licensing Committee meeting. Please vote. So that motion fails 2-2. So, well, let's go back. Is there another motion then that a committee member would like to make? So that was Member Lear's motion. Is there another motion that we have the recommended motion from staff that we could present, or if somebody has an additional motion, or we do nothing and it postpones automatically?
I'll go ahead and move that the committee approve R277-211 draft 1 on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading.
Thank you, Member Wood. The motion before the committee is that the committee approves R277-211 draft 1 on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading.
I have a substitute motion, Matt.
Okay. We're gonna put Kelsey to the test here. You ready? Member Lear.
I move that we adjourn.
Do we need, I don't know if we have a second. I don't know how that works.
Need a second committee, so you just.
Oh, so we just vote. Okay. You gonna put that on the screen or should we just, okay. Okay, the motion is that we adjourn. Please vote. Okay. That, I know. We appreciate it. So that motion fails. We are back to Member Woods. No. Oh, sorry. The motion on the floor is that the committee approves R277-211 draft 1 on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading.
And
Yes.
one final
Member
comment.
Lear.
I appreciate the discussion. I appreciate the fairness. I am just a fan of discussion, and especially when it doesn't take board time. So that's why I really felt it important to have a month, and last month was very productive. And even if there's nowhere to go with a discussion, sometimes letting an entity or a body or a person just air their concerns and grievances is worth my time. So I am a big fan of that. I guess that's why I'm in the profession I am in. But I wished we could have done that, but given that we can't, I'm sure that those representing teachers will continue to find a good outcome for all teachers and fairness for all. Thanks.
Thank you, Member Lear. Member Hart.
By moving this forward, that doesn't preclude any conversation. If anything comes of that, we would just need someone to bring a motion. So my inclination is to keep the process moving forward, not delay it, still have those conversations and bring whatever necessary to the board. Well, yeah, but not because of our decision, not.
I guess I'm reminded of our retreat that we just returned from with the term trust the process. And if the process is it goes to a public hearing, then we're going to trust that process. So I think whatever happens in the future, it happens, and we're going to trust the process. And I believe it will come out where it needs to come out. So with that said, any other discussion to this motion? Let me repeat it then. The motion before the committee is that the committee approves R277-211 draft 1 on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading. Please vote. It looks like that passes with 3 in favor, 1 absent, and Member Vice Chair Carey absent, and Member Lear in opposition. Thank you, committee members. And thank you, staff, for your work on this and all of those representing organizations in their work in furthering education here. I'd seek one final motion that was already rejected.
I move to adjourn.
Okay.
I move we adjourn.
All in favor? Aye. Oh, look, we do get a vote on it. You're quick. Okay. Looks like it is going to pass with 3 yeses, 1 absent, and 1 abstention. Okay. Meeting adjourned. Thank you.